Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Thank you for listening in to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and I am joined by Jake McCoy, one of the real McCoys. How are you doing, Jake?
Hey, Aaron, how are you doing? Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anybody who doesn't know, Jake McCoy operates McCoy Bladeworks and is a phenomenal knife maker, up and coming, I would argue, and comes from a really great lineage of knife enthusiasts, collectors, makers. And for anybody who didn't know, yes, McCoy from the Hatfield and McCoy lineage, right? Right, Jake?
Yes, sir. That's what we just talked about before we got on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm eighth generation McCoy family.
So customary for the show, I want to know a little bit about you and your family outside of knives. So if you want to just give me a kind of rundown of who you are, what your life is like, what your hobbies are outside of knives, so on and so forth. You just tell me what you want to.
Okay, so I guess I'll start. I'll start from the beginning. Um, so I'll kind of do an origin of how I got into knife making and everything. My life leading up to all this. So I was born and raised in a small town in Georgia called Harris County, Georgia, right next to Columbus, Georgia. And I lived in Columbus, lived in Harris County all the way up until I was 17 years old. And up until I was 12 years old, when I first got into knives. And my great grandfather, who passed 2 months ago, was actually a knife maker himself. So I've always been into knives. Always wanted to be in the knife industry. And there was one day that my dad, most people don't know this, my dad worked at AT&T. When he was 18 years old, he got a job at AT&T and worked there for 20 years. And we lived down here, and I asked him one day. I saw the biggest knife show in the world was going on an hour and a half north of us in Atlanta, and I begged him for his day off of work if we could go there for a day and go to Blade Show. So my first show was when I was 12, and I've been obsessed with knives ever since. I've made a ton of great friends through the knife industry, and over the years, I'd worked when I was 12. I got a summer job with my cousin doing lawn maintenance to try and afford knives, and when I first got into it, I started buying production knives here and there, and then by the time I was 13, 14, I was saving up for $400, $500 knives just because I'd save up all the money I made over the summer and stuff like that. And when I turned 17, that is when I have a really good friend. Most of y'all probably know him as Sebastian Berenji at Borka Blades. But I'd met him when I was 13 years old. He had a YouTube channel named Sibo Strip. It's actually still up if you go on YouTube. But I followed a lot of his like knife reviews and everything like that. He reviewed a lot of the old school, like the early 2000s popular knife makers. He worked with John Gray a lot and worked with Gavco and was really good friends with Dalibor Bergam and stuff. So I would always watch his YouTube videos and all the reviews that he did, and I met him in person, and we had been friends for several years. And at Blade Show when I was, I believe, 15 or 16, we had met the Marfione family that owns Microtech Knives, and after about close to a year of consistently, my parents would put in the effort. I was offered to be an apprentice at Microtech and learn how to be a knife maker. And my parents every other weekend would make 5.5 hour trips up to Hendersonville, North Carolina. And I would learn how to make knives and do all that. And then my dad was offered more than AT&T was paying him to run Microtech social media. So my family, when I was 17, we moved up to North Carolina, and I worked for Microtech for 5 years, and I left. So I did a lot at Microtech. I learned how to grind. I worked under Sean Marfione, who grinds all the blades there. That's Anthony Marfione, the owner's son. Um, he grinds all the Marfione custom blades. So um, towards the last year and a half working there, I would rough grind all the blades, and me and him would go back and forth. I also made a ton of sheaths at Microtech. I did all the well, there's three guys that do all the handwork at Microtech, doing hand rub satin blades, mirror polish blades, stuff like that. I worked there doing that for a while, and did processing, did all the fit and finish work, tumbling, um, all of that. So anodizing, etching Damascus, all of that kind of work. So I worked there for 5 years, and then when I got to the point where I felt like I was ready, I left, and that was May of 2020, I believe. I think May of 2020, either 2020 or 2021. I don't know. My years are running together. Um, so I left. I left Microtech and started out making fixed blades, and lived in North Carolina for about another year. And my dad, my parents moved down to Gainesville, and I'd actually reconnected with a girl I knew since elementary school. She lived down in Miami, Florida. My wife Tegan. I'd reconnected with her, and then I moved down to Miami. So I lived down in Miami for over a year, and apprenticed under another one of my really good friends that I've known since I was 13 years old, Edison Barajas of Shark Nivco. So I would take hour-long trips up to his shop, and um, we figured out that we were having a baby January of last year. So I would take hour-long trips up to his shop, and work out of his shop and make knives and stuff like that too. And I also worked out of a storage unit. For anybody that knows, in South Florida, Oakland Park, right next to Fort Lauderdale, I had a shop in the hood in Oakland Park, because um, the um, the cost for any kind of industrial building was just ridiculous down there. So I made knives out of there, traveled, learned how to make folders from Edison, and finally started making folders. Um, and I finished my first folder the last day that we were actually moving back to Georgia. So we moved in January this year back to Georgia, back to my hometown in Harris County. So that's where we're living now, and I'm currently making folders.
That's a pretty exciting journey. um, I noticed that your wife and you have a really interesting dynamic with the way that you handle social media and everything like that. And my understanding is like some of your social media like group and everything is fairly new compared to how long you've been making and selling knives. Can you talk a little bit about uh, your, I guess, launch into social media and what you guys have kind of been doing?
Right. So I've had Instagram since I was like 13 years old, and I would just post here and there whenever I got the chance. I used to be one of those people that was very adamant, like I had to post stuff and I had to do this. And then I got to the point where I was working so hard, I really couldn't keep up with all of it, and I was just making knives as I go, and I would post them here and there. But I've only really had Instagram up until this point. And then it got to the point to where I don't know if most people know about shadow banning and stuff like that. I would make a knife post, and it wouldn't get any kind of recognition in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I'd heard from a lot of my friends that ran Facebook. My really good friend David Mayer, that runs the Ancient City Continental on Facebook and everything like that. He was telling me about how well Facebook does, and how well Facebook does with groups and everything like that. So a few months ago, I started a Facebook group, and it grew to about 400 members um, within the first like month or so, and it was doing pretty well. And then my wife, Um, she was a server down in South Florida. She worked at a place called Yard House, and she worked her butt off all the way up until 13 days before she had our son. But after we moved up here, she decided she was going to be a stay-at-home mom and everything like that. And she was like, I can run all the social media, I can run the Facebook for you and stuff like that. And she ended up taking over the Facebook page, and within probably 2 or 3 weeks, it ended up going from 400 members to almost 2,000 now. So
Yeah.
it shot up really fast because of her. She has done a really good job with it. But also because of my really good friends John Nomikos and David Mayer too. A huge shout out to them because they've also helped run the Facebook group really well. But as soon as she got a hold of the page, she just started making posts and started inviting more people, and it's taken off pretty well. So I'm really happy with how it's been so far. Um, we always joke because every time she makes a post, she'll get like 400 comments. She'll literally get so many people. She's like, I got more attention on your group than you do. But no, she does really good with it. I'm really proud of her. I'll send her work in progress pictures from the shop, and she'll post them up, and she does a really good job at responding to everybody. And that's what I've mentioned this before, but it's so great getting all of the messages that we do, and it gets so overwhelming to where responding to people is crazy how many messages you get on a daily basis. Um, for people that are interested in my work and stuff like that. But it's an honor to have so many people that want a knife and that just want to participate and be a part.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in preparation for your interview and everything, because I watch a lot of knife makers just as part of. So I'm a custom knife maker. I watch a lot of other guys' works and guys and gals, and just try to appreciate what individual makers are bringing to the table, because that's something that interests me. And so when I saw, I think your wife invited me to your group, and I've been watching you guys and realized that I knew so very little about you before she invited me to your group, and now it's just like this flower opens up, and I'm like, oh, that's like what you're doing is really cool. I really like your work. Y'all's dynamic and family dynamic is really cool. And I started asking around about you, and Jim Skelton had him and I are buddies in the guild, and have worked on doing stuff. Yeah, and he was like, I love his like that family. You guys are just always super nice and almost break his ribs with hugs and stuff at blade shows. So
It was when he was selling watches on TV, and I think I joined a live video, and he shouted me out on that live video, and I was like 15 years old, and I was having like a moment because I was such a big fan of him on YouTube. So yeah, Jim's an awesome guy.
yeah, I think that one thing that's interesting about Jim too is for me, he's never held back opinion on things that I've asked him about with my knives, critiquing or otherwise. But he's also very encouraging. It's like, hey, this is where I see that there might be some problems, but like, you got this. Like, you do these things, and I think that you'll take it a lot further. And so I've always appreciated that insight from him. But he is really like a sweet man, and really just likes to pay homage to people who are impress him and everything, and inspire him. So I talked a little bit about you and your work to him, and been looking around in other places. So I actually really appreciate what you guys are doing with your social media, because I feel like it's easy when you're in the show circuit, because there's it's like what you're seeing in your social media right now is basically the same kind of thing that happens at shows.
Right.
Where you get around, you talk to old buddies, people will comment on things, give feedback or whatever. You just like kind of like riding this wave of euphoria and excitement. That's what the show circuit is. And I don't know that for people who haven't especially been to the mecca of knife shows in Blade Show Atlanta, they wouldn't necessarily know. But that's kind of what the hub is. Like
Right.
it's really just a place where even if you've met somebody for the first time, it's a commune of old friends, it seems. And that's kind of what I like about like the big shows.
Right. And plus everybody shows up there. And like I said, my first blade show was when I was 12 years old. So it's kind of funny getting the that was this year will be my 10th or 11th blade show. 11th blade show. So I even get comments of people being like, I remember when you were this tall. I remember when you were a little skinny kid, and so yeah, it's absolutely like family. There's been people that have been in this industry um that I've been such good friends with, and and there was almost this group of knife makers that were coming up that are now like that now have these insane companies and great demands and stuff like that. When I came to my first show, like I said, I was more in a production. That was my first show. My second blade show, I'd gotten into customs and I met Edison and his brother Victor for the first time. He had just started becoming a knife maker. Um, the first person I ever talked on the phone with. So my parents, this is how my parents got a social media. So I was talking on the phone one night to a 40-year-old man, and my parents were like, "Who are you talking to over Instagram?" I was like, "Well, I was calling him, and I was like, oh, it's my friend Ramon Chavez. He's a great knife maker and stuff like that." I remember I was there the first year that Ramon had his table, and his knives just blew up and everything like that. But I also worked when I was 15, 16. I worked at Blade Show and in Vegas at Ramon's table. So the Chavez family is awesome too, and it's crazy. It's crazy, like almost growing up in this industry. Being able to have people that are family to me is really awesome.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like your parents were overprotective of you going and doing this kind of stuff? I mean, I can only think about like being a dad, and if they were like, "Oh, hey, I want to go out to the movies with a group of friends," I'm like, "Ugh, I don't know if I'm okay with that based on who your friends are. I need to know them, right?" But you have you who you're in this knife community and everything, and I guess there has to be a lot of trust or a lot of observation in order to make sure you're not just handing your kid over to a bunch of wolves. Because I mean, I know like the knife industry can get pretty rowdy too. I mean, it's
Right.
like and being a kid. So like, what was your experience with like your parents and how they helped to enable you into this world? Like, do you feel like they were protective at all, or were they pretty cool about it, or how did they handle it?
So like I said, when I first started, when I was talking to Ramon for the first time, they were like, okay, he's talking to a grown man on the phone. Like, we got to get like some kind of social media presence to be able to like, not stalk what I'm doing. My parents have never been that kind of been in any way overbearing, but they were like, we want to make sure he's not doing anything crazy. So they once they went to Blade Show for the first time, and the first year was me and my dad going, and then the second year was my entire family went, and we actually stayed for the entire weekend and everything like that. But once they met everybody in person, they knew that this was a great group of people, and like you said, getting rowdy. It's funny because that when I was younger, one of the things I looked forward to the most, and I've never drank, I've never smoked. I don't have anything against people that do, but I've never done any of that. But the number one thing I would look forward to out of anything at the show was the pit, because you could talk to everybody. You could hang out with
Yeah.
everybody. It was like a big party. So I would stay out in the pit up until like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I would be one of those psychopaths. But yeah, I would stay down there as a kid. My parents would go up to the hotel room and pass out, but I would stay down there for the longest time and hang out in the pit and talk to everybody. But yeah, my parents at first, whenever they realized how great the knife community is, they were completely trusting of me being in an industry like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and anybody who sees your parents, especially your dad, probably should be a little bit concerned with how, like, twig like the rest of us are in comparison to him and his bodybuilding. So like if you're ever interested on social media, you can see his dad and just don't mess with his kids because he's a big guy.
He's a lot tougher than he looks.
Well, kind of on that note, like, so I was looking through your Instagram and everything back, and you did some bodybuilding and competing and things like that too, right?
Yes, sir. So I've always been into MMA, the whole MMA world, stuff like that. I grew up around that. So when I was a kid, I did jujitsu, and then all throughout high school, I wrestled. Um, and then my senior year of high school, so this kind of connects to moving to North Carolina. Whenever we were moving to North Carolina, was my junior year of high school, and I had to decide. Because I knew that I was going to be working at Microtech, apprentice and learn how to be a knife maker. And I was like, if I want to make this my future, it's either this or wrestling. And I was good at wrestling, but the school I was going to, my junior year of high school, didn't even have wrestling available at that school. It was a really small school and everything. So I was pretty much out of wrestling. And then I kind of wanted to find something else to be able to do in the meantime that I could control, and that's when I started getting into bodybuilding. So my first bodybuilding show was when I was 18, and then my second one was 19. I hadn't competed since. It'd be better for me not to since my son was born. I have a dad bod now. but but yeah, I lost a lot of weight because I was when I most people from Blade Show know me from when I was 120 pounds all the way up until my sophomore year of high school. I was 120 pounds, and I was always really skinny and stuff like that because I always made weight for wrestling. And then when I got older, I ended up wanting to do bodybuilding. And my first show, I think I was like 155 or something. I was an extremely heavy 155. But and then this past year, I got up to 220, and then now I'm like 185 because ever since Roman's been born, I haven't went to the gym. I haven't. It's been about 8 months since I haven't went to the gym, and I've set that to the side, but I'm not too concerned about it because I know I can always get back to it. I'm 23 too, so uh, I know I'd rather be present as a father and do that than have to worry about getting a meal in at this time, meal prepping 24/7, going to the gym at certain times. But I've just now started going back to the gym after about 8 months, so it feels good.
Yeah. Well, or you could wait until you get towards my age, and then you just naturally gain weight. You don't even have to worry about it like that. You could get to 225 super easy. Yeah, so I'm interested to know. So you were into fixed blades, and you switched into, I guess you're primarily focusing on is frame locks, right?
Yes, sir.
And what made you make that transition from fixed blades to pocket knives?
So I've always wanted to make folders. That was kind of the goal from the start. I've always wanted to make folders, and whenever I left Microtech, I didn't. I had no knowledge of how to make folders really, not really by hand, but I did know how to make fixed blades. So as soon as I left Microtech, I kind of stuck with what I knew, and I knew how to grind. I knew how to do fit and finish work. I knew how to do contouring. I knew how to do all of that stuff. So, and I knew how to make sheaths. So every little job that I had when I worked there, I kind of learned how to make fixed blades off of that. So as soon as I left there, that's what I started with. And then, like I said, when I moved down to Florida, about 2 years ago now, as soon as I moved down to Florida, I didn't even know Edison lived down there, and we had started talking, and he was like, yeah, you should come to my shop sometime, and I was like, where you at? And he's like, I'm literally an hour north of you, and and his brother Victor lived in Sunrise, so he lived like 20 minutes away from me. But he's a full time pastor, so he was he's always busy here and there and stuff like that, and I never wanted to wanted to bother him with coming over to his house and everything. But Edison does knife making full time. So I was making trips up there, and Edison is the one who taught me how to make folders 100% by hand. Everything that I've done up until this point, which after Blade Show, it'll officially be 11 folders I think I've done. So I've just started, but everything that I've done is based off of the the notes that I took at Edison's shop. So I wrote everything down, took pictures of everything, took notes of every single bit of it, and that's how I learned how to make folders. So I made my first knife in his shop, and then when I moved up here, I started. I hit the ground running pretty much, wanted to make as many as good of folders as I possibly can.
Yeah. So, my understanding. So you're doing knife making full time, right? It's not a part time gig for you, right?
Yes, sir. It's full time.
Yeah. So, when you started doing all the stuff with your wife and social media, how did that change like your books and everything? Like, are you making specifically to distribute at shows and with dealers, or do you keep books, or kind of what's your sales process?
So we started. I didn't really. I would kind of make knives as I go whenever I had fixed blades. I just post them up for sale and stuff like that. But as soon as I started making folders, I got. I think it was like 20 something names on a book spot for a lot of my friends that wanted folders and stuff. But as soon as the Facebook group blew up, I'd made a post. I was like, okay, I'm gonna end up opening up book spots, and having stuff available to people. And as soon as I posted that, it got up to about 100 names, and I had to close it really fast because it was so overwhelming. I had to close it. So as far as book spots go, I have those. I have it up to about 100 names, and I'll be fulfilling that as I go, and also doing shows. So I'll be making enough knives to bring to Blade Show. I'm bringing 6 folders to this year's Blade Show, and 2 of them are going to be deliveries to people that are on my book spots. And the other 4 will be on the table. One will be an auction. 2 will be lottos, and another one. Thinking about doing a raffle on another one. So maybe people will be able to get a good deal on a disciple folder.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. So what would you say in the learning curve has been into transitioning from fixed blades to folders? Like, what are some like your largest challenge points with making that transition?
Oh, it's a whole different world of you know I don't want to like over complicate it and say it's like extremely hard, because it's not really. Most of everything that's different between fixed blades and folders is mostly basic math. But it's definitely been a slow process. I'm really meticulous with my work and everything. So my first folder took me like a month to make, because I wanted to be as um, precise as possible. And I didn't want to put out. I hold my work to really high standards, because working at Microtech and seeing that kind of level work, and then be apprenticing under Edison and seeing his work. I didn't want to short myself with coming out with folders. I wanted to go all in and come out with something that was that people would be interested in. So the learning curve, as far as uh, for the most part, um, I wouldn't say there's anything that's extremely hard. Lock and detent's pretty scary. Lock's not that hard anymore to me. The detent, setting the detent's pretty a challenge for me as of right now. Something very specific, but um, the same principles are there. Grinding, fit and finish work, hand contour, and stuff like that. It's the same variables, which is really good. But um, I do everything by hand on a 1950s Rockwell mill. So all drilling all the holes and everything by hand and doing all that. So nothing is there's no CNC machine involved or anything. So it's a good bit of work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a. I've been like looking over some of your work. I have to say, like, I really enjoy your aesthetic. It's just, there's something about the way that you make your folders that is very eye appealing to me. Like, where do you feel like you're pulling most of your inspiration for your design and material choices and things like that?
So as far as folders go, my main inspiration for that was for anybody listening that knows Edison makes a knife called the Waka, and I really wanted. So I really have always loved the idea. I've never owned one, but I've always loved the idea of the Sabenza, of how simple the design is. It's literally like the most basic streamlined knife you could imagine for an EDC knife, you know? And so I've always loved that idea of creating a very simple design and executing it very well. So I took a lot of inspiration from you know, just having the idea of trying to create the most simple thing possible. And the original drawing for my first folder, which is the Disciple, that was done on a piece of paper. Like all of my folder drawings and everything, I just started on a piece of paper. And I brought it to Edison's shop one day, and I was like, "You think I can make this?" And he was like, "Yeah." And he knows how to use Fusion and everything like that, so he programmed it into Fusion, and he machined out a template for me. So it's basically just the shape of the knife where you have all the holes to know where to drill, the lock bar cut out, the backspacer, the clip screws, stuff like that, and then the blade so you can trace out the shape and get it as close as possible on every knife to replicate it. Um, but yeah, after we were going over stuff in the computer, I was pointing stuff out and he was pointing stuff out to change, and then by the time it was done, I was like, Edison, that looks a lot like a Waka. That looks a lot like one of your knives. And he was like, I don't care. You have my permission to make it. But that was one of the main people I've taken influence from is Edison, as far as folders go. And then as far as fixed blades, I've had a lot of people that have helped me along the way. I've had Bastian Chavez of Bastinelli Knives. He's helped me a ton. So I've taken a lot of inspiration for my fixed blades from him. Sebastian at Borka Blades, I've taken a lot of inspiration from him as well. And as far as fit and finish work and attention to detail, um, that 100% goes to Edison, and then the guys that helped me at Microtech. You know, they definitely held me to a really high standard as well. Um, the guy that is the head of the department that does all the handwork, the hand finishing and everything. His name's Brennan Riley. He taught me to do all the hand rub satin finishes, mirror polish blades, stuff like that. Sean Marfione taught me how to grind, and then Jeff Yang and Brad Arnold, they work in the customs department for all the handwork, all the anodizing, all the etching, all the assembly for all the custom knives, stuff like that. So they both taught me a ton when I was there as well. So yeah, I've I've got my knife making attributes, I guess, from a lot of people, a lot of different people that have helped along the way. And then TJ Marfione as well of Heretic Knives. He only lived 2 hours away from me when I lived down in Miami, so I would drive 2 hours up, and this was before I knew how to sharpen. He would sharpen my knives for me, and he would also laser the logo on the blades because I didn't have access to a laser at the time. So TJ helped me a ton as well, and he taught me how to. Him and Bastion both taught me how to sharpen and everything. So I learned a lot of different techniques from a lot of different people. But I think that's I think that's the goal is to learn, you know, the best techniques that work for you and combining them all together to be well rounded, you know.
Yeah. So what was the inspiration for the name of your blade, the Disciple?
So all of my all of my fixed blades and all of my folders have biblical background. So every one of them, my first knife was the Genesis, and then my second knife was the Exodus, and then people were asking me if my third knife was going to be the Leviticus. But I didn't know if that would fit a knife name too great. But yeah, all of my knives have biblical background, some kind of biblical background to it. I have these little fixed blades called Waymakers, and then the Disciple, and then yeah. So that's all I can think of off the top of my head. The one knife I made that didn't have a biblical reference was the Cyrax, and that was a Mortal Kombat reference. But other than that, that's the main idea for most of my knives.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing that impresses me about you is that you are really kind of like the embodiment of a disciple, right? Like you take this raw passion as a young impressionable child, and you just surround yourself like by a bunch of people that are just willing to help you, and willing to show you the ropes and everything, and give you the opportunity, and you soak that up and you turn that into what you're doing like now. I mean, so what better reference is that than being a disciple? You're carrying a lot of this knowledge and doing your own thing. So
That was a really good interpretation of that. I never even thought about it that way.
well, um, you know, something that interests me, I don't think that I can recall a time when I was a kid that knives were like this. That I didn't interpret them the same way that you have, right? Like we used them as tools, and they were just always around. But it really took me as an adult to look at it and say, hey, this is pretty cool. I don't want to spend a ton paying for other knives, so I'm going to try making it myself, right? It's more of like the economics of knife making, which is a losing effort. Like, I mean, I've spent way more on knives than if I would have just went ahead and bought some custom jobs. Like the thing is like, what, like, did you just always know from like the time that you were getting into it that that's what you wanted to do? Or what was your, like, if you can recollect, like what were your thoughts on knives at the time? Is this where you wanted to be?
I really, since I was 12, I used to competition shoot. So going back before that, actually, this is how I funded my knife collection to start with. So when I was like 4 years old, and I'd had family members pass stuff down to me and stuff like that, but I collected coins, and I collected coins all the way up until I was like 10, 11 years old, and then I sold all of them because I'd gotten into competition shooting. So I sold all of them for $11,000. Well, most of my coin collection and everything, and that's what funded my competition shooting to begin with. And then after I kind of got out of competition shooting, I'd gotten into knives when I was 12, and that's what I've wanted to do since that age. I've always felt called to do this and be in this industry, and even at that age, I like I said, my great grandfather was a knife maker and had a knife shop. Actually, that he had made out of his old house. So they built a house on top of the hill where they lived, and their old house he turned into partly a knife shop. So on the same land. So if you were to go to my great grandparents' house today, my great grandfather's knife shop is still in there. He has belt grinders, everything like that. But I think growing up around that environment always kind of put it into my head that was something really cool. And then I think the real kind of obsession started when my dad one day gave me a Benchmade Griptilian. Um, and that's kind of the first like real knife that I ever had. And as soon as I got that, I just got obsessed with wanting to collect knives. And then after after a couple months, I wanted to learn how to make them. I'd sent there's actually a picture. on my Facebook group of me holding an SA5, and I'd written a letter to a few knife companies, and drawn it on a piece of notebook paper, well, a few pieces of paper, and wrote a letter to them asking if they wanted to use one of my designs to make for their own stuff. I was like, I don't care about profit or anything. I just think it'd be cool to design a knife and stuff. But yeah, that's something I've wanted to do for the longest time, and seeing it finally come to fruition and being able to be a knife maker, it's kind of shocking to me because and I've mentioned this on my Facebook group before. It's gotten so overwhelming that I'm starting to see knives go for more than what I sold them for and stuff like that, and like secondary market come out, and then all these people like want to get a knife from me and stuff like that, and I'm like, I don't feel entitled to any of this. So it's insane being in the industry since I was 12 years old, and now seeing everything come to fruition and so many people supporting what I do is just like insane to me. It is so overwhelming, but yeah, I love what I do to the furthest extent. I love it. I love knife making. I love the process of it. Um, and I love the people in the knife industry. It's without a doubt the most welcoming group of people in the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and like even really not knowing you very long and everything, I'm really proud of you. Like, I mean, it's one of those things where it's when you see people that are really passionate, right? When you see people that are good, that are honest, that are loving and caring, you want them to do well, right? And that's something that I instantly recognized about you is that I can be proud of you and your success because you want it and you have a support system that loves you, supports you, and wants it for you. And where do you see this going? Like the next, year, 5 years, 10 years? Do you have any vision for the future where this changes, or you have any goals for things that you want to achieve beyond just kind of riding this wave of, I don't know, support and acknowledgement?
So I used to have the misconception that I wanted to be. I used to always say when I was younger, I used to say I want to be the best knife maker in the world. That's the goal. But that's a very vague goal, I guess, because that's all subjective. Not everybody's gonna say so and so is the best knife maker in the world or this guy's the best knife maker in the world. But as far as business goals go, I really do want to. Over the years, I want to end up expanding the amount of designs. Because I only have one folder design. Um, so expanding that, being able to make more folders, more styles, more design stuff, and eventually, I wouldn't mind doing basically like the same concept that Microtech has, in a sense that, well, a little different. So I would really like to have a production company, a full-on production company, and then be able to make knives 100% by hand myself and do what I'm currently doing. So actually start up a production company, and then in the same sense, like Marfione Customs, when it comes to them being custom knives, they have over 40 employees in the customs department. So in my mind, I want to be 100% by hand, with just me, and then at the same time end up eventually starting a company that I could do um, runs of production knives and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I want to talk a little bit about your grandfather, and I guess what his knife making was like. Did he mostly did he do it as a hobby, or did he sell them? And I guess what was your experience growing up with that? Just in I guess what he did for like surrounding knives, if that makes sense.
So it was 100% hobby. He had all the equipment and everything, but he just did it as a hobby. You know, he's a World War II veteran and everything like that, and he would do it for fun here and there. He made a couple knives, and I actually have one of them. But he would always go. So this is funny. Their main attraction in Murphy, North Carolina, the population where they live in North Carolina is 1,600 people, extremely small town. And every time we would come up there, we'd go to the flea market, and I would go with my great grandfather, and we would and he would always collect case knives. So that was one of my first like experiences of seeing knives too. Was seeing my great grandfather go to the flea market and wheel and deal getting case knives and everything like that. And um, it was funny because a few years back, um, we would take trips to North Carolina and everything, and we will always make fun of when every time we'll come up to North Carolina, my great grandparents know everybody in that town. Like people that my dad went to kindergarten with, they know them. And they'll say, oh, so and so died. My dad will be like, oh my God, I can't believe they died. And I'll be like, oh, that's so sad. And I'll whisper to my dad, I'll be like, who is that? It's such a small town. They knew everybody. So there's one time a few years ago when we came up, and my papa was talking, and he said, yeah, old Kit Carson died. And I looked at my papa and I was like, you mean Kit Carson, like the knife maker? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, you knew Kit Carson? And he said, yeah, he went to the flea market every weekend. And I was like, how did I not know that you knew Kit Carson? And he said, he lives 2 miles up the road.
Oh, goodness.
So, yeah, my great grandfather knew Kit Carson, and he'd passed before I even got to meet him or even knew my great grandfather knew him. But yeah, my great grandfather did that just for the most part as a hobby. But like I said, growing up in that environment was something that I could say definitely made me want to have a passion for knives and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how many people in this world would like nonchalantly mention that they knew or were friends with Kit Carson and just like go on their merry way. It's like, oh, you're like a knife enthusiast, and he knew about that, and it's like a pretty big relationship, and you're like nothing. Like you're not even gonna tell me until after he's gone.
I know. I was like, I had no idea you knew Kit Carson. He's like, yeah, he goes to the flea market every weekend. I guess he didn't know that I was in the industry enough to know who Kit Carson was.
Well,
He probably didn't even know Kit Carson was known, honestly, because my great grandparents they have a landline phone and that's it. There was no connection at their house, nothing. So they have zero idea probably that Kit Carson was even known in the knife world either. They just probably thought he made some decent knives.
yeah. Well, it's a funny story. I work in IT, and I was working for this company up in Springfield, Missouri at the time, doing e-commerce stuff. And I went to this convention up in Chicago and was talking to this guy that they were massaging for a sales deal to do the development on something or other, right? And we were talking about knives, and he said that he used to sell something. He was like a sales rep for something, and A.G. Russell used it, and so he would go up and go to his shop, and A.G. Russell would show him like all the mammoth ivory, like the full tusks and all sorts of stuff like that. But he was nonchalant about it too. He's like, oh yeah, I was just like, he'd show me all this cool stuff and everything. And it was just a very small facet of his life. But when I was talking to him, I was like, well, I'm a custom knife maker and getting into all this stuff. And he just pulled out this story of A.G. Russell. And I was like, that's pretty interesting. That I think it's just a generational difference where there's not as much connectivity between people. So they don't realize sometimes like the reputation precedes people.
Right. It's the knife industry that connects us.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's one thing that I really, I mean, it's a large reason for me doing the podcast. I invest my own money and my own time, And it really has just come from a desire to be able to document knife makers, to be able to promote them how I can, and really just to dig into the behind the curtains, because you have this public persona, and sometimes people curtail that pretty strictly, and you see it on social media. But I want to be able to talk with people and get I want to make them like cry like Oprah does. I just want to get down to the raw, real deal.
And it's cool to see people like do interviews with knife makers and stuff like that, because when I was growing up, I followed. There's two people that I followed every single video they posted. It was Jim Skelton, and it was if you ever watched Wieners and Steel, where they it was an entire group of they're now my friends, but it was an entire group of people that would go to a hot dog place every single weekend and film YouTube videos and bring out knives and stuff like that. But yeah, it's it's great to be able, because the knife community is such a small community too, and is so tight knit. And I think it's crazy that I've seen a lot of activity on Facebook where people be talking about knives here and there and be like, oh, this knife sucks, or this maker sucks, or something like that. And it's like, this isn't like an industry where people don't see that. Like there's knife makers that see stuff all the time, like, because it's such a small industry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's so I was talking recently with Lucas Cow. He operates Squid Industries out in California.
Right.
And I posted up on Reddit about the interview that I did with him, and somebody was talking about some drama related to a Reddit user who was bashing their quality assurance or whatever. And I was like kind of like researching through all this stuff, and Lucas answered him, and I think was thoughtful in the sense that I don't know if a lot of people realize just how close knife makers, even if it's your business, if you're in production work, like how close you are to your product, right?
Right.
And I often see that there'll be some disagreements. Somebody will like disparage a brand or an individual knife or an experience they've had, but then get to talk to a person and be like, maybe I misjudged that. Maybe I just misjudged the fact that the product, the thing that I was experiencing, was maybe an isolated fault, and it wasn't the maker, and it wasn't their entire business, and it wasn't their entire multi-generational history that I should be hating, but maybe it's just like this experience was a bad one and I need to regroup.
Right. You see stuff like that here and there but for the most part, the knife community is the greatest community there is. There's I think the knife community is so good at filtering people out too, like genuinely bad people, because I've been in this industry long enough to see, like, if people are doing something shady or screwing people over or anything like that, within within a few minutes somebody will have their address posted on social media. There's the knife community is crazy in that sense, to where everybody is so tight knit and so close that it people that people that have genuinely malicious intentions and stuff like that don't last in the industry very long, because yeah, the knife community is very well filtered with with great people.
Yeah, there's a lot of loyalty. I mean, I've seen it both ways. There's a lot of loyalty, and then there's people who sit on the fence and they just like to see people fail. But I would say, by and large, like if people just recognize that in knives, especially, you're not really going to find a lot of makers and a lot of business owners that are any closer to the pulse of their business, right? And it's like, so understand that generally they want to make it right and make you happy, but be kind and courteous and respectful, and typically they'll be like very willing to work with you. But it's like the really rude ones that are the hardest to deal with, because you're kind of just like, I will work with you and try to sort this out, mostly just so you'll go away.
Right.
and that's a tough situation to be in, especially when you're passionate about your work. But I wish you nothing but success, and hopefully in your endeavors you don't run into that. But you get into production work and you can't have your hands on every single thing. You just have to figure out what your policies are going to be and how far you're going to take it on making people happy. But as long as you put the customer in an appropriately first position, I mean, so you're not breaking the bank to try to make them happy or breaking your own back, then I think it'll be fine.
Right. Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So my typical last question for everybody I have on the show is, if you can give a few pieces of advice to up and coming knife makers or business owners or people like that, and I think especially in your experience, younger kids who are interested in trying to pursue their passions in knives, like what would those things be? Like if you take your experience and say, that there's kids out there or young impressionable people in knives that need to hear something in order to spur them on. What would those things be?
I would say the most helpful thing to me is, I didn't I never expected to take the path I did as far as getting here over 10 years of time. I never expected that it would be going through every bit of the process I did to finally be able to make folders after 10 years. When I was 12 years old and wanted to be a knife maker, I saw it as kind of a next day thing, like, oh, I'm going to learn how to make folders. I'm going to do this and it's going to be great. So don't underestimate the process. If I didn't go through what I've went through of learning how to pay attention to detail and certain things like that, and how to run your own business, how to do all of that, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in because of that process that I've went through on making knives and stuff like that. And then when it comes to learning how to make knives, especially as a young person, never be afraid to ask people questions, because that's one thing that's so great about the knife community is, I don't really believe in trade secrets. I believe everything's kind of open knowledge for the most part. People have certain ways they do things here and there that are not really known. But if you ask one person and they don't want to answer, I'm sure the next person you ask will have the exact same answer. It's pretty open knowledge when it comes to knife making, and everybody, for the most part, is so welcoming to help. Especially up and coming makers. Like, I wish every young person had the position that I was in, to where I was so blessed to be in a position where I had a lot of mentors and was able to learn a whole lot. And was able to take kind of different styles from everywhere that I'd worked or learned from and stuff like that. But yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to learn. Don't be afraid to fail, but don't put out a subpar product too, because that's also very important. Still hold a very high standard for yourself, and know what that looks like. Because thankfully, I would say it's really good that I was a collector first for a while too, because I had an idea of what quality looked like, and then now being a maker, I have even more of an idea of what quality looks like, because I know how things are done. I know processes and stuff like that. But even more so, I think it's important to know what that quality looks like, and to be able to do it to the best of your abilities.
Yeah, that's all really great advice. I hope everybody listening here takes that to heart, because even as a knife maker myself, those are all things that I constantly have to remind myself of, right? It's like, nothing comes overnight, and anything worth doing is worth doing right. And everything that is right is not always easy. So, I mean, I talk about knives being very philosophical, because if you think about it, life is like that too. Like a marriage it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to make things stable, and it's not always the most intuitive thing. It's chaotic, and relationships with other people. It's that same way. Your relationship with your kids, and man, you'll find this out. But kids are hard to raise sometimes, and not always when they're super cute and they just like, I love you, daddy. Like, but when they get to a place where they start challenging you, and you got to like figure out, how am I going to try to break their spirit, or I'm going to try to work with them and take a different path. So, knives are the same way. I learn something new all the time, and it keeps me real honest and real thoughtful, I guess.
Oh, 100%. And there's that's one thing that I'd say was a benefit of learning from so many people too, is you can take those methods of what you've learned and apply it in the way that best suits you, and then always keep learning, because if you think you've made it in the knife industry too, it's not. There's always more work to do. You can always do better. You can always improve no matter what. I still have a ton of room for improvement. Like I said, after this blade show, I'll have finished 11 folders. So I know pretty much next to nothing when it comes to knife making in comparison to some of these people that have been doing it for years, and as of right now, I'm sticking to everything that I've been taught and sticking to what I know. But I'm always open to opinions and what's out there. And I think if you are closed-minded to there being a better way to do things or anything like that, you can't grow that way.
Yeah. Well, it's to your point when you said like your goal was to be like the best knife maker in the world. Like you can obtain that, right? You can be the best knife maker in the world of your knives. And as long as you always try to focus,
right.
As long as you always try to focus on improving yourself, you will become the greatest knife maker in the world of your knives. And it's, like regardless of what anybody else is doing, if you keep focusing on that singularly, you can make an incredible piece of work.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Well, Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. I, have fun with the new baby and your wife and everything. And I won't be at Blade Show at the end of this year. Otherwise, I would have come to see you and everything. But if you're at Texas next year, I'll be sure to see you.
When is Texas next year? Is it March?
Yeah, I think they moved it. They moved it earlier in the year. Yeah.
I'll be there. I'll be at Blade Show this year, and then I'm either gonna do USN this year or Nashville. Do the Nashville show. I'm leaning more towards Nashville because that way Tegan and Roman can both come with me, and everything like that, so I won't have to fly or anything. But yeah, it's only driving distance. But yeah, I'll definitely be at Blade Show Texas next year. I'll be at Texas, Blade Show Atlanta, and then Nashville as well next year.
Cool. Well, I hope to see you soon in person and shake your hand and everything. Look over your work, and again, I'll just be a fly on the wall watching your career progress and your family grow. And I really appreciate you investing your time and talking with my listeners, and hopefully they can follow you as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.